So from what we've heard, there are plans to establish an independent public prosecutor's office, and hopefully that'll be coming very soon. Now, compared to what was written in their manifesto, we haven't seen any progress on the abolishing of the executive presidency. We haven't seen any progress on a new parliamentary electoral system. We also haven't seen any progress on the 3-judge bench that is meant to streamline cases of financial crimes and bribery, so on and so forth. And lastly, we have also not seen any progress on strengthening the National Security Council and the establishment of a National Security Advisory Board thus far. The executive presidency, being the core feature of the 1978 Constitution, was, very simply put, supposed to promote communal harmony, provide the conditions or create the space for decisive action for economic development, and lend itself to more stable government. Now, with regard to communal harmony, the idea was that an executive president, having to gain 50% plus 1 of the vote in order to become president, would require to appeal to a cross-communal majority. But presidential elections have decisively disproven this, where candidates have appealed to the ethno-religious majority in order to win the office of president at the expense of minorities. Take, for example, the 2010 presidential election and the 2019 presidential election. The other is how the executive president does not lend itself to good economic decision making, because the lack of checks and balances creates greater space for opaque economic decision making that lends itself to incompetence and even corruption at times. So, take for example President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's tax policy of 2019 and how it acted as a catalyst for the economic crisis. So the executive presidency hasn't delivered on its promises and has actually worsened those issues, and therefore it should be repealed in favor of a system of government that is typified by checks and balances that promote collaborative and more thought through decision making, rather than what we have currently, which is a lot of power concentrated in one office that has led to disastrous consequences. So we need to reconsider the composition of the Constitutional Council, right? The Constitutional Council appoints all the commissioners of all the other independent commissions, and the idea of the independent commissions is to depoliticize governance. But the Constitutional Council itself has 7 members of parliament and 3 eminent persons who are not part of the political establishment from various other sectors of Sri Lankan society. It should be a majority of eminent persons, and if possible actually only them, and maybe one figure from the political establishment, for example the Speaker of Parliament, right? So we need to reconsider the composition of the Constitutional Council, or at the very least go back to the arrangement it was under the 17th Amendment. We need to depoliticize and professionalize the public service. We need to introduce post enactment judicial review, and we need to have a meaningful system of territorial devolution to the provinces that we do not have currently. The 13th Amendment, as it is currently, has many flaws. One is the fact that the provincial governor, who is appointed by the president and dismissed from his or her office by the president, as in remains in the office at the president's pleasure, making him or her an agent of the president, has so much power in the province, right? Even over the elected representatives of the province, that being the provincial council from which the provincial board of ministers is comprised. This is how provincial statutes, that's the laws that are passed by the provincial council, having to be assented to by the provincial governor, the fact that the provincial governor is the de facto provincial minister of finance, and the fact that the provincial governor has power over the provincial public service are all not in keeping with the principles of devolution. Not only does he have a lot of power over the elected representatives, even the provincial public service isn't independent, right? So the powers of the provincial governor and the way in which he or she is appointed and dismissed is a serious impediment to provincial devolution. The other is the distribution of subjects across the three lists, the concurrent, provincial and legislative lists. And lastly, the fiscal arrangement of the provinces, whereby the provinces have the money to carry out their executive and legislative functions, is also not great. So that also needs significant reform. Of course, we want to abolish the executive presidency and replace it with a parliamentary system of government. That means the president becomes a ceremonial head of state, the prime minister becomes the head of government and the head of the cabinet of ministers, and that cabinet can only go about its functions so long as it holds the confidence of parliament. Then we would also have a bicameral parliament, that being a two-chamber parliament. So the lower house would be the House of Representatives. That is where all the elected representatives through parliamentary elections, that would be where they are. And there would also be an upper chamber, the Senate, which is one where there would be provincial representation from the provincial councils, where we would have provincial senators from these provincial councils. And we would have expert representation in the form of national senators, who are figures of eminence from different sectors of society, that be civil society, academia, media, etc., that have no ties or roles in the political establishment or government, right? So then we would have expert representation for greater legislative scrutiny over legislative bills and therefore producing higher quality legislation. Then we would have a meaningful system of territorial devolution, where provincial devolution works better, addressing some of the weaknesses that I just discussed. And we would have the national, provincial and local governments recognized as constitutional levels of government that are interdependent, interrelated, but worthy of their own unique respect. And we would have issues that should be dealt at a certain level, dealt by that level. So if there are local issues, they should be dealt by local government, and this improves responsiveness because the right level of government is dealing with the right level of problems. We would have post-enactment judicial review for the reasons I mentioned. We would also have the Constitutional Council further depoliticized than what it currently is, where there is a majority of these eminent persons, these non-political figures in the Constitutional Council, that allows for the depoliticization of the rest of the independent commissions. We would have an expanded or enhanced Bill of Fundamental Rights, and that would be the crux of the constitutional arrangement that we will be putting forth. No, we have not, but we would be more than happy to work with the government if they are willing to work on constitutional reform in the way we think they ought to work on constitutional reform and the kinds of constitutional reform they should be looking at.